Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you. Welcome back to the show, everyone. As you know, we are in the middle of a mini-series focused on fundraising in ethnically diverse populations. And we think this is a really important topic to engage because while there are universal truths to the fundraising process, we know that that can look very different depending on your experiences and the community that you find yourself in. So today, we are honored to be joined by Chay'vion Carter. He's coming to us from Texas, from the UNT, University of North Texas campus specifically, and from his home church, the Village Church in Denton. Chay'vion has been working on the UNT campus since 2021 with campus outreach and loves to invest his time into discipleship and mentorship of students. Chay'vion, what have I missed?
You haven't missed too much. I think what I would add to that is I am an avid reader. I love reading. I would say that I love having the opportunity to grow, not just in the work that I'm doing, but also in marriage. I feel like the Lord uses marriage as a way to shape and prune us. And so that's been awesome. I always tell Peyton that if we weren't married, I think I'd be two times less. Whoever I am now, I'm half of that without just the shaping that happens in a marriage. And then I just have the pride and joy of raising my daughter, Naima. She's 7 weeks old. Yeah, that's been awesome. So I love to read. I also like sports. I'm a big sports fan. Ohio State Buckeyes is my favorite team. I'm actually from Canton, Ohio.
I went to Penn State. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I love Ohio State. I'm from Canton, Ohio. That's where most of my family is from. And so you haven't missed too much, just that I love to read and I like sports and I'm a family guy.
Yeah, well, and you said your daughter is 7 weeks old. So, man, thank you for being here. And I tell you what, you got a big smile on your face, which is great for those early days of parenting.
Yeah, you're very alert and ready. And I love your intro because I feel like most people, that was so unique.
Yeah.
Chay'vion, I love that. Thanks for leading with I love to read and all these other things that our listeners would be like, yes, I connect with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Any favorite books?
I appreciate you, Jen. You're a good encourager. My favorite books, two series I can't get over, and I know it's so cliche, but who cares? I love the Harry Potter series. It's just the world building that J.K. Rowling is able to, the world she puts you in is just wow. The books are a million times better than the movies. The movies are just snapshots of the book, honestly. But I love them both, but really a big Harry Potter fan. Also a really big fan of the series that C.S. Lewis did.
Oh, the Space Trilogy?
No, not the Space Trilogy.
Okay.
The Chronicles of Narnia.
Ah, yes.
That series is really, really good. I actually listened to it, and sometimes I have trouble listening to stuff for a long time, but I had no problem listening through that entire series. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It is.
Those are two of my favorite series.
Yes.
Very cool.
Both series that do a lot of imagery with the kingdom and God's work and that kind of, if you can.
Yeah, if you can see that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I love it. All right. Well, let's dive in. Chay'vion, thank you for that intro. So as Heather mentioned, and as you told us, you've been working in ministry, raising support since 2021, and you said May, right, of that year?
Yep. That's whenever I was officially hired. I had been raising support since that January.
Yep. So paint us that picture. So when you started that initial fundraising season, what was it like and how did you feel about it?
I was kind of anxious to get it started because I knew I was going to go on staff with Campus Outreach in August. That was the year of the pandemic, 2020. And the Lord really did some pruning and shaping in me. And it just became clear that he was calling me to go on staff with CO. And so I was excited to get into the fundraising process a little bit. However, once I did enter it, I realized how hard it was. I was a part of a cohort with Funding Tribe.
Oh, great.
Which,
Tony Denman.
Yeah, with Tony Dentman. And that was awesome. But Tony Dentman is not, I wouldn't say a tough critic. I would just say like, he's very honest and real with you. And I remember my first time doing like my support pitch, and it was not up to par. And so I just say that to say the process of just getting into support raising was hard. And I didn't realize how much preliminary work needed to be done in order to begin reaching out to people. I mean, you got to gather up your contacts. You probably need to create some sort of website or something so where people can see what you're doing. You need to have opportunities for people to connect with you. You need to be like easily accessible. I think the importance of being in community, like having a local church people that you can like ask to support you, that you already know are committed to the work of the gospel going forth. All of those things like are important. And so as I think about that season, I'm just really mindful of the work that had to be put in just to begin. You know? And
so it sounds like you had some curriculum. So I'm not familiar with this Tony guy.
Tony Dentman with Funding Tribe?
No, I'm not familiar. So maybe some of our listeners also aren't familiar. So can you tell us like what that process was? What kind of support you received in going into fundraising?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our director at the time, the director, Stuart Childress, he placed us all in like Tony Dentman's program. And I'm pretty sure it cost something. I didn't know about it, obviously, but, or I don't know what it cost, but I know like we were a part of the program, and essentially what it required was faithfulness in the sense of whenever you're a part of the program, every Sunday at 8:00, you'll be a part of this cohort. You'll be responsible for making X amount of calls. You'll be responsible for reaching out to X amount of people. And all of like what you're supposed to be doing is on an Excel sheet. And on this Excel sheet, you have like steps to raising support. And then after steps to raising support, the amount that you're raising, how much you would need to raise over the course of the next 3 months. Okay, you need to raise $600 a week in monthly support. Okay, this is how you count somebody who's supporting you. If somebody gives a one-time donation of $1,200, it wouldn't be the wisest thing to count that towards your yearly support because you don't know if they'll support again next year. And so if somebody gives a one-time donation, you calculate that like they're giving one time over the course of 4 years. Just different helpful things that help people reach their support in a sustainable way. Another big thing was gathering a list. Like he made us gather a list of 500 like people. It's like, wow, really? And so we're scrolling through our contacts, we're scrolling through our Instagram. I mean, I remember getting on LinkedIn and following lots and lots and lots of people and having to be bold enough to like reach out to them. I'm going to coffee shops. I'm talking to people there. Whatever opportunities I have to network with people, I'm having to use those opportunities, you know? And so I think he did a really good job of laying a good foundation for it in like a structured way. That Excel sheet that had everything I needed as far as support raising was super helpful as I was seeking to raise a significant amount of money, you know?
Yeah. So it sounds like it was high structure, which was really helpful in kind of giving some clear boundaries to things. I'm curious whether in that training, did you have an element of training that looked at like biblical foundations or kind of God's provision through his word and for his people over time? Or was it more just kind of the nuts and bolts of the structure and finding contacts and things like that?
Tony trusted that the vision that we had for going on staff with whatever ministry we were a part of was rooted in solid theology. You know what I'm saying? A solid understanding of the scriptures. But as far as like support raising throughout the scriptures, I will say those are things that I had to learn over time. I'm sure we highlighted them, but as I think about it now, I have learned those things over time and they've been encouraging for me. I think about how in Hebrews, the author, who we don't know who he is or who she is, it's like the author talks about there being a cloud of witnesses, right? And how in a lot of ways we're standing on the shoulders of people who were faithful before us. And as I think about support raising, man, we're standing on the shoulders of Jesus and the disciples who had people who were helping them. We're standing on the shoulders of the apostles who were going out and proclaiming the gospel. And how did that happen? Well, the church, God's people, were sharing their resources and through their resources, it created opportunities for the gospel to go forth to different places. And I'm thinking about how in many of Paul's letters to the churches, he's asking some of them for financial support in order to do the work that God has called him to. He gives examples like, man, you don't muzzle an ox and And it's just clear as I look at at the arc of scripture, even if you go to the Old Testament, you think about how priests were able to live. The gospel has always gone forth. The gospel of the good news of God's kingdom has always gone forth through support of the people, and so that has really strengthened me and encouraged me as I think about raising support. But I will say I learned a lot of those things, and maybe he did say it, maybe it was emphasized, but I learned a lot of those things later on, which I think support raising will bring you to. Support raising will bring you to the point where like, Lord, I need you.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole pruning process. There's a whole, did I even know what I was doing before?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, so I'm always learning. So.
Yes, 100%. So going back, you said you're really excited and then you got really anxious as you got into it because there's so much work involved. What would you say were some of your obstacles? Because you mentioned like his process was garner 500 people on your list. And so that was like one thing. But what would you say were some of your biggest obstacles in that initial season?
I think because of the high structure, it wasn't any lack of clarity on what I was supposed to be doing. But as I think about obstacles, the two biggest ones I kept going to, because I did a little bit of thinking about this, I think it was fear and doubt. It was internal for sure. Like it was the fear of being rejected. It was the fear of telling somebody something I was doing and them like not understanding at all. And then I think it was doubt in the sense of if I like literally when I was having back-to-back support meetings, I could have a support meeting with somebody and they might be like a Christian and they might totally understand what I'm doing. And so I'm kind of feeling confident because they're sort of, there's a way in which like if you've ever been to counseling, there's almost an invitation into opening up and sharing what you do. But that's not every support meeting. I would go into another support meeting and the person, I would get the sense, and I could have been wrong for sure, but I was getting the sense like, oh, this person is skeptical. This person, like, this conversation doesn't feel like inviting. It feels like I'm pulling teeth a little bit. And that caused doubt in me, like, man, is what I'm doing like actually good? I had people say things like, why would you get paid for that? Why would somebody pay you to do that? One person was like, I do that at my church and I don't get paid at all. You know what I'm saying? I'm just like, man, I'm pretty sure you don't do it full time. But it's just the difficulties for me were just fear and doubt, a lot of internal battles. And that has something to do with just the way like I'm wired. Raising support revealed my desire to be approved. You know what I mean? And And that right there, it was seeds of doubt that could have been easily sown by the enemy. And so I'm grateful to have been a part of a cohort, and I'm grateful that God sustained me and gave me courage whenever I needed it to keep going. But fear and doubt were the two biggest obstacles.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think those are very common, which doesn't make them any easier to navigate. But I'm glad that you had a cohort that could, speak truth back to you, that you could all together kind of say, yeah, this is how we're feeling about this. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
One more thing I'll say about that, though, like as we talk about like the cohort, I also had the advantage of having somebody else who was going on staff with my exact same ministry, like at the exact same campus, who was also becoming one of my best friends, like who was doing it with me.
Right.
And so, and he was a football guy, so he's really competitive. And so I would see him raising support and part of me was like, okay, I got to raise my support, And so
that's good accountability.
Yeah,
that is
for sure.
So I'm curious, so I know you said your wife's name is Peyton. Obviously you didn't have your daughter at this time, but were you and Peyton married yet? Or were you single as you were raising support initially?
When I started raising support, me and Peyton were dating.
Okay. So you were raising support as a single. How did that look as you transitioned to becoming married and even now having a family? How has that looked different than the initial fundraising season?
I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians as Paul is giving like his personal but wise opinion on like it's easier to run whenever you're single, now that I'm married, there's a lot more communication in the things that I do. You know, it's like, hey, babe, on Wednesdays, I need to go to Frisco, or I need to go to Dallas for this meeting, or I need to go here for that. Whereas before, it's just like, all right, I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm going here. So I think there's a communication aspect to it. I also think that there's an added level of pressure, because it's not just me raising support for myself. It's me raising support for myself and for my baby who's 7 weeks, and for my other baby who I'm married to. You know, so you got those two aspects. So I feel like it adds a little bit of pressure,
right,
in the sense of like feeling the need to provide. That's why I love the Psalms, though, because I see where like God provides. That's why I love the Lord's Prayer, where it talks about us having our daily bread, and it's like trusting that the Lord is going to provide for me and my family.
Yeah.
The Bible has been so helpful for me in believing that. But yeah, I think there's pressure added. And then I also think there's not as much freedom to roam. Or there, not that there's not, but there has to be a lot of communication in order to do certain things.
Right.
And then also you got to, I'm raising support right now. I got a 7-week-old daughter. There's a balance between like going to raise support, but then also being helpful for my bride,
family.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're with your family, you're married, obviously, you're a father, you're almost 3 years in, you're entering into your 3rd year of full-time ministry. How is it looking now with all of these factors in the mix compared to like when you were single, compared to when you were initially raising? Like, does it look different? Does it look different even meeting with your supporters? You said you're currently fundraising. Like, how is it looking now? How do you feel?
Support raising. So the good thing about actually doing ministry and then support raising is that you have a way better idea of what you're inviting them into. Whereas before, like I was telling them what I was thinking I was kind of going to do. You know what I mean? Not that there was a lack of clarity from like the organization. It's just you don't know what you don't know. And so I was doing ministry already as a student, but it didn't look anything like being on the campus and going through the sadness of somebody seemingly walking away from the Lord. It didn't. But I get to tell those stories. And so I feel like my ability to explain what I'm doing got a lot easier. Also, though, like the time I'm being pulled like in my time, because like there's 5 guys I'm discipling. There's about 7 guys I'm discipling now. Between the seven of us, we're probably connected to like 40 other students. And so you think about like that ministry pool. And so you have this and you have that, and you need to get lunch with this guy, but then you're also raising support. And then you're also raising a family. And so time management becomes very, very important as you transition from a season of being single and not really knowing what you're doing, but at least having the freedom to go and do something, you know, whereas here it's like you're balancing out doing the work that you're already doing, raising support. Sometimes it's a significant amount if you get a raise or you have a child, or depending on what ministry you're in. And then also the added factor of like family. It becomes a whole different ball game. Time management is very important. And then learning how to work smarter and not harder. Trying to hit 2 birds with 1 stone, like those type of things become really important. You got to learn how to be effective with your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you said that when you initially started raising support, you had some voices that were speaking kind of like, why are you being paid for that? Or why would you do that? And maybe even voices saying like, well, are you going to get a real job? You know, there's all kinds of things that we can encounter in this. I'm curious what kind of support you received from like your family, or even from, I know that the Village Church has View for outreach and missions. I'm curious whether your church prior to that did, and kind of what that support looked like for you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I grew up in a Black context. Like me and my family, we moved like 17 different times growing up. I'm the second oldest of 6. Yeah, I didn't like count it until like a year or 2 ago, and I was shocked. Like, goodness gracious, that was a lot. We moved like 17 different times growing up, mostly within the same city. You know, and so just like we would live in a house or an apartment, and then we'd move the next year, and then we moved the next year. But growing up second oldest of 6, my grandmother was always stable. My mom had me whenever she was 18, and she had my older brother whenever she was 14. And she always worked, and she did the best that she could. But money was tight a lot. And so in my support raising season, I really wasn't expecting a lot from my family. I will say they did support me though. Like from my grandmother,
Wow.
she was a member at Westside Baptist Church, which might be one of the largest Black churches north of Dallas. So she was at Westside Baptist Church. She supported me and connected me to a couple other people. Most of those connections didn't work out because of the second part of your question, which is like how were they viewing missions? Like how were they viewing like evangelism on campus? Like did they have vision for that? The answer is no. And then also with the church that my family grew up going to in Denton, Moore Street Baptist Church, that's where I was a leader in that ministry my junior year. It kind of phased out my senior year because the pandemic, a lot of churches didn't have the infrastructure to do a lot of the things that they were doing before. And so there at Moore Street, so in my family, yes, they supported the best they could. They didn't have a lot to support, though, if I'm being honest. But I'm grateful for their support. Their support was the most encouraging.
Yeah, it sounds like they kind of like holistically thumbs up. We support you in terms of their affirmation.
They did. So my family, they were very supportive of what I was doing. Of course, there were questions like, "Oh, like what is this?" Or "You are getting a college degree," or "You sure this is what you want to do?" Like even now, whenever I go to my grandmother's house, I love her. Like they're kind of like, "Wait, what do you do again?" So they don't 100% understand. Like to be clear, but they were supportive. As far as the churches I grew up going to, though, unfortunately, it was not the same. Part of those hard conversations that I had, where I'm telling you, like, hey, why? Like somebody flat out asked me, why would we pay you to do that? Like, why doesn't your church pay you? Why doesn't the church that you're like at like pay you? You know what I'm saying? Or another thing they would ask is, well, how is this organization helping you? Like, so this place wants to hire you, but they don't want to. They're not going to. It's just like those conversations oftentimes came from the Black church that I was a part of. Now, that's not everybody's experience. There's a young man who I was talking to maybe 2 months ago, and he came from a Black church, and they were all in. I think they like basically supported most most of their support was raised there. But for me, for various reasons, it was not as successful. I had meetings with a church and the deacons there at Westside, and it wasn't successful. I had meetings with the pastor at Moore Street. I talked to different members, and oftentimes it wasn't successful. And the saddest part for me was I don't think they didn't support because they couldn't afford to support. I think they didn't support because they didn't have vision for what I was doing, which is just like which speaks into like how churches see missions. I think in Black communities, oftentimes when the church thinks of mission, and this isn't a bad thing, this is just it's a unique thing. So for Black people throughout American history, the church was like the institution. This was the institution where, food services, education, spiritual needs, all of those things were happening within like the all the help that Black people were going to get, it was in the Black church for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so part of the way that I would say Black churches see missions is serving in their communities.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And so if I'm talking about, hey, I want you to support me financially so I can help people meet their greatest need, which is knowing Jesus over here. It's just like, well, we got it's things to do right here,
Yeah.
And so I noticed some of that. And in some churches, they was like, how does that help us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just flat out, some people didn't support me. A lot of people of color didn't support me because they said this basically isn't going to I was talking to a young man a couple of weeks ago, and he basically was like, I just want to support where I'm being fed. And I'm just like, did I not do a good job of sharing with you that these students don't really live in Denton, that they're moving to different places across the DFW, that they're going, God willing, by the Spirit of God, they'll be members of local churches one day. Like, and it's it's at the largest university in North Texas. I'm like, am I not explaining vision? But I don't think it's that. I think it's just not a paradigm for, it's like, it's not a paradigm for doing what I'm doing. For a lot of people, they had never even heard, they like never really heard of what I was doing. Or if they did hear what I was doing, it was like, yeah, missionaries are people who go overseas. You're here.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you want to share the gospel, get a job and then do it here,
Right.
you know?
Right. I'm so curious about the differences, because you said you had your friend who also grew up in a Black church and they were all in. Did you notice any differences between like your churches versus his church and like why they were so gung-ho about it? Did you ever think through that or have that conversation with him?
I didn't really have the conversation with him, but I wonder if part of it has to do with like his father's position, like in the church. Like if I was Black middle class, I'm low Black middle class. My grandmother, she was stable. She stayed in the suburbs. And so like we always had a place to go to. So I was never like really in jeopardy of not having a place to stay.
Right.
But financially, that probably would have been true had it not been for my grandmother, you know? Whereas this young man he grew up in a 2-parent household, a Black mom, Black father, and they lived in a neighborhood for a number of years. I wonder if my mom had been married and we were living in Louisville by West Side and my dad was a deacon, if people would have thought differently about about whether and how to support me. Because y'all know support raising is also is based on like relationships and networking. And so even though my grandmother was a member there for 20 years and like one of her really good friends is like one of the head deacons at the church, they still didn't support. So I wonder if some of it has to do with like his relationship, like how deep his relationship was like with that church because his father had been a member there for so long, you know? And so maybe that could have been a difference.
And I'm also curious, like between all the Black churches that you've mentioned, your friends, the ones that you grew up with and reached out to, like what is the general like age makeup? Would you say it's like your grandmother's age? Would you say it's like your mother's age? Some of your age? Like is it diverse or is it like the older generation?
I've done a lot of thinking about that, honestly. And from my wife's church that she grew up going to AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal, which was the first Black church in America.
Cool.
And the church that Peyton grew up going to was older and exceedingly older. And unless God's Spirit breathes on that church, it looked like that church is a dying church. You know, honestly, that denomination is a dying denomination, it seems. And I would say the same thing with Moore Street, the church that I grew up going to. It's like, it seems to be older. And I talked to Mark, who is the head deacon at Westside a couple of weeks ago. And I was asking him, like, man, what's the general age of the church? And he was like, man, honestly, like 50 plus. And so I think that's common. Now, there are some dynamic like speakers in different like Black churches. Like you'll find that they speak in such a winsome way that they can navigate like the younger people to come in. But I think that is only like their talent, their gift is only, it slows down the thing, but it won't solve the issue. There needs to be discipleship happening within the context of these churches. Like if discipleship isn't happening, teaching only holds for so long because all it takes is a teacher. The next teacher who comes after that one, if he's not as good, that church will shrink. Yeah. Like the way to have a sustainable, healthy church is going to be discipleship. And it seems like the common denominator between a lot of those churches is the way in which they view discipleship. Sure. Discipleship is like an in-house, like come to Sunday school, come to this Bible study type of thing. But with the way that our culture is going, like most of the kids in college, they didn't go to church. Their grandparents went to church. Yep. So they went to church with their grandparents on Easter. Yep. They went to church with their grandparents for Christmas. It wasn't, you know what I'm saying? It's not like they were going to church consistently. And the church has to go out to people. Yeah. We got to be willing to engage people. I don't think a lot of Black churches are equipped to go out, or the Black churches I encounter were not equipped to go out and bring people in. Yeah. They were so used to people coming to them, which was so true for so long.
Right.
And
exactly.
So I think they're adjusting to that.
And I bring that up because we've had this conversation now with a handful of guests, including myself. I was a guest on this series as well. And it's just interesting to find these threads that are being woven in multiple ethnic communities. You know, for myself being in the Asian community, we just heard from a Hispanic guest, and we're finding these same patterns of older churches, the generational being not serving the church, and they were used to receiving from the church. So how can you think about missions? How can you think about going outwardly, right? So it's just really interesting to hear that your experience has been very similar, coming from the Black community. And now, so my next question is, so then how did you pivot, right? If your communities weren't as supportive, seemingly, your family was very much so. How did you pivot, and what were some tools that did work, or how did you network outside?
I probably contacted like 400 people I didn't know between like LinkedIn and Instagram. And that helped me a little bit. Pivoting for me looked like getting uncomfortable and talking to people in the church that I was kind of newly attending, you know?
Right.
And so I think reaching out to a lot of them, and then some of the people who were supporting me in that season, they were connecting me to other people. That was always a part of my ask. There was never an ask that I had that didn't include, hey, would you consider being a tribe donor? And a tribe donor in Funding Tribe is like when somebody supports you X amount, but then they help you raise 1,000 or they help you raise 500 in monthly support. And so I think being connected to some people here at this church who were supporting me, and then honestly, like, the Lord gave me a spirit of boldness to just talk to anybody I knew about potentially supporting. And so I was at coffee shops in Dallas. I was at a Bible study. I'm telling everybody I meet about like potentially supporting me, you know? So.
Yeah. Well, Chay'vion, you know, I've not had very long to get to know you, but from this very short time, some of the conclusions I've reached is, wow, he is a really passionate communicator and casts vision very well. So
Yes.
I can see, I'm just excited for what the Lord might use that for, even within in the Black church community, and casting vision for raising up disciples that then come back to the church. I can also tell that you have overcome a lot, you know, just in growing up in a home without two parents and being one of 6 children. And I think that your resilience is admirable in the way you carry that.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I'm always appreciative of compliments like that. It's just interesting because being who I am, it's like I can never think like that. And so it's helpful whenever people encourage me in those ways. Because, you know, just like most people in the world, it's just like, just living life, you know, just trying to be faithful to what you're called to do. So I really do appreciate that encouragement.
Yeah. Can you share with us some stories of how God did provide in these seasons of fundraising, even in ministry?
Maybe I can give 2 stories, but there's one on top of my head. Hopefully the other one comes. The first one is I was doing FCA at the high school that I used to go to, Denton High School. And I had just got done talking about, I can't remember what I was talking about. Regardless, I was introduced by my former coach to a guy named Scott Henderson. And me and Scott ended up talking, and we ended up grabbing barbecue, which is our thing now. We grab barbecue at least once a month. We'll go to Rudy's.
Good for
we'll
you.
Get some barbecue. And at the time, he ended up being like my largest supporter. Like we met, and he chose to come on my support team for like $400 a month. And I'm just like, nobody has done that up to this point. This was, and just the odds that I met him, I just happened to be doing the FCA that week. It's not like I did FCA every week or anything like that. And so being connected to Scott was definitely a story where God provided, and then the Lord used him to connect me to some other people who at least considered supporting. And so that's an example of God providing. I'll also say the season of supporting was just a picture of God providing, because I started raising support my senior year of college, right? So I was in college. I was working 25 hours a week. So in college, full time, working 25 hours a week.
Wow.
And I'm raising support.
And dating Peyton.
And dating Peyton. And so between all of that, it's like, I'm from February, started raising support, honestly, in February. My support was raised by May 28th. Somehow,
praise the Lord.
Between like those 4 months. And honestly, I think it was like being a part of Tony Denton's program, one requirement really was faithfulness. And so I'm reaching out to a ton of people, whether I know them or not, each week. I think that whole season was just a picture of God's faithfulness, because as I look back on it, I didn't really have the connections. Like sometimes I kick myself. I'm like, man, why? Like, Lord, why didn't you tell me I was going to be a missionary when I was in 8th grade? Because then
I would have started then.
I would have became best friends with everybody I knew, like I would have, but I wasn't thinking like that until the Lord had put it on my heart my senior year of college during the pandemic, where you're like sort of isolated. There's not even like relationships.
Right.
Like relationships are put on hold in those seasons. You know what I mean? And so,
that's incredible.
Yeah, I think that
you said February to May, you raised support, and you raised it
from
fully.
February to May, I raised 100% of my support.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Even that's a story of how he provided. And that's a testament to your faithfulness to what God was doing. I just feel like with all that was on your plate and all that you were going through, like how amazing. Kudos to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. God really does his thing.
Yeah, he does. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting, you opened this podcast just sharing with us that you really feel like marriage is a place of formation. It like forms you. It makes you a different person. And I really think that the support raising season and just the reality of support-based ministry is also formational, right? It's forming us to look to the Lord as our provider and to walk in obedience. And so it sounds like it's been a really powerful, formative experience for you.
Yeah, I love how God can use any circumstance to conform us into the image of his son. There's one thing to read the scripture, like Luke 9:23-25, where it talks about picking up your cross and dying daily. But whenever you're married and you have to continually choose somebody else over yourself, like now you're practicing what you believe in a way that's just unique whenever you're single. And also in a season of support raising, it's one thing to look at the psalmist like weeping because he's asking for the Lord to free him from the bondage of his enemies, because he has the betrayal of a friend, and the only thing he has is Christ as his rock, Christ as his refuge. And it's another thing to read those scriptures while being in a season in which you cannot move in somebody's heart to force them to support you. Right. You're just incapable of it. You don't know what's in the mind of a man. You don't know what somebody's thinking whenever you're meeting with them. And that season of support raising, even now, it's super humbling, because you recognize, God, unless you go before me, I go in vain. Psalm 127. God, unless you build this house, I build in vain. In vain, I labor working to provide, because you're not before me. And so I think like the psalmists the psalters, as some would say, have really blessed me in terms of being encouraged. And I don't think I would have eyes to see that if it wasn't for a season of support raising and truly learning to be humble and dependent on the Lord. It takes a lot of humility to ask somebody to join you in what the Lord is doing, especially when you don't know if they have any vision for it.
Right.
And so,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, man. For those listening who are from a different background, what do you wish they understood about fundraising in your context?
What I wish people from different contexts understood about raising support in this context is that it's hard, but the application to it being hard, I would want to be like, man, pray that God would raise up missionaries that are of color. Like less than 2% of all missionaries are African American.
Right.
And so I think what I want them to understand is that it's hard, and in them understanding that it's hard, like pray. And as you have brothers and sisters who are on your staff team who are of color, pray with them. Ask them how you could pray for them as they're raising support. Raising support is always difficult, but for some people, they do have the connections to help people who are raising support. And so maybe giving somebody who is coming from like a certain background and they have the ability to help others raise support, do that. That's one way you can help the gospel go forth, not just by proclaiming it yourself, but helping raise up others who will proclaim it as well by supporting them and connecting them to people who will support them.
Yeah.
And so I'd say I want people to understand that it's hard, and And I hope that would lead them to prayer and then also thankfulness. Even as Paul says, like, in our prayers, we ought to be thankful. I think that's like Colossians 4:1. He talks about like give thanksgiving in your supplication, And so be thankful that the support that God has provided your support, because there's always somebody who's going through a rough time in their support.
Yeah.
And so there's opportunity for thankfulness as well.
Yeah. And then for those listening that are in a similar background as you, or context as you, or even Black, how would you encourage them? You've offered a lot of nuggets of little encouragement throughout, but what would you say to them?
You got to prepare hard. Like you got to prepare hard, and you have to be willing to go the extra mile. If you're going to need to get uncomfortable. I would also say what I've noticed in my support meetings with people who look like me, especially older people who look like me, share the vision for what you're doing more so than you share the vision for what your ministry is doing. From what I've noticed, they're not as compelled by me saying, so CO is committed to this and CO is committed to that. Of course, I'm a part of CO, but there's like a relational wisdom that you have to have whenever you're engaging certain people. And so being able to tailor what you're going to say in light of what they care about. And so like language that I typically use as I'm raising support in like African-American spaces is, hey, here's an opportunity for young men and women to know Jesus. I don't just say college students because they think college and they think, oh, that's far off. But if I say young men and women, they might think about their kids. If I say young men and women, they might think about somebody that's like at their church. And so some of the language that I use is a little bit different. And so I would definitely say for people who are in my space, like share vision for why you're doing what you're doing. Get them excited about why you're doing what you're doing. I had a support meeting with a man a couple months ago. He owns a barbecue spot. He actually owns one of the only Black-owned barbecue spots in Frisco. And so whenever me and him met, he was like, man, I really like what you're doing. But next time we meet, this I'm learning too. He said, next time we meet, or next time when you meet somebody, man, tell them what you're doing. It's like, tell them what you excited about. And it's like, that was helpful for me. And so I would give that same sort of advice to somebody else. And then another piece of advice I would give to somebody is, as you raise support, always have something to leave with people. It's not as prevalent amongst like younger people. Like I can just give you my QR code, or I can get your number and just shoot you a text. But I think leaving older people with something is very, very important. Like leave them with the card so they could think about it. Or if you don't want to do that, like immediately text people after you meet them, and whenever you're raising support, call. Don't just leave it to a text, call people. And then you be persistent. Whenever you're persistent, people know that you mean it. People know that you're serious. And so even as we get off the phone today, I'm going to call each person who I'm asking like to support me. I used to not call, I'm not gonna lie, because I was kind of scared,
Yeah.
But now it's like recognizing, no, you're not inviting them into something that you're doing. You're inviting them into something that God is doing.
Right.
And you're depending on God. And so you can ask them. And so I would say calling people is very important. I would say tailoring what you're saying to them is important. I think that's it. I think preparation is really important though.
Yeah.
So prepare and be ready to reach out to a lot of people.
Love it. Very practical.
Yes. And I think very helpful, because I really do think, as we are kind of getting into the weeds on just different cultures represented, different backgrounds represented, really like understanding what people value and how to connect what you're doing to what they value in a very real way is so helpful. So I think that was super practical, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other resources just to our listeners that you would recommend?
I would recommend getting a popple.
A what?
A popple. It's like this little thing on the back of your phone. Now, you could do it with the iPhones now as well. But anytime I'm at like a networking event, I could connect with people in like 2 seconds.
Is that your QR code?
Yeah, it's like a QR code, but they don't really scan it. I just tap their phone with it. And whenever I tap their phone, it immediately helps me save their.
That's amazing.
It gives them my information, and we exchange information in a much quicker way.
Yeah, without having it to be like, give it to me number by number.
Like, hey, how do you spell your name?
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. How do you spell popple?
Yeah, Popl. Yeah, popple.
Love it.
I think that's what it could be. It could be Pop L or something. I call it Pop. So I think that right there is helpful. I would also say, like, what makes support raising hard for me, like in this season, is we have like 7 people on staff, like at CL. You know what I mean? Like here at UNT. And so a lot of our church members are already supporting people.
Yeah.
And so another helpful tip is to find like maybe local Bible studies in your area and attend those and build relationships. I've garnered support. And like I go to a Bible study every Wednesday morning. We have a OTG this weekend, which is an off the grid retreat. We have our OTG retreat this weekend, and I was able to raise some money this morning just because I built relationships by attending this Bible study over the course of the last 3-4 months. So I come in there, I'm like, hey guys, we need this for OTG. And they're like, oh, here. Like just, so Bible studies could be helpful.
Cool. Yeah, very cool.
Building networking.
Yep. Yes, networking. Yes. Big. Awesome. Okay, well, we have a question that we ask all of our guests. So it's our final question for this conversation. Thank you again so much for your time. Okay, so you have $10,000 that you have to give away today. You have 5 seconds to decide who or what do you give it to and why.
I have to give all of it away to one thing.
No.
You can be creative.
Okay.
You can be creative. Yeah.
Okay. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give $5,000 to David Balagoon, who's raising support to go on staff with CL.
Cool.
One of my good friends, he's raising support to go on staff. And so I'm going to put $5,000 there. The next $5,000, I'm going to put it in an account that creates interest for my younger brother, Braylon. So that way, whenever he graduates, he'll have a little bit of money as he's going off to college or as he like wants to buy a car or something like that.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Very cool. I love that. All right, Chay'vion, thank you so much for your time.
No, I appreciate you, Heather. I appreciate you, Jen. Y'all are really easy to talk to. Like, I just love what you guys are doing with this podcast. And hopefully everybody who's listening enjoyed it. And I hope y'all know how wonderful Jen and Heather are and just how genuine they are as people. And so y'all keep on checking out, not about the money and coming back because it is awesome. And I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you.
The gospel is the greatest need, and you're helping people as they seek to provide that. You guys are doing great work.
Yes. And blessings to you as you continue your ministry. Blessings as you go into these early months of fatherhood. We pray for strength and peace and lots of sleep for you and Peyton. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.